A black homeless man rescues a child that has fallen into a river, and he is shocked when he finds out who the boy's father is. Max sat on the worn bench near the riverbank, his eyes fixed on the swirling water below. The city was bustling just beyond the park, but here, by the river, it was quieter. A place where he could think, where the noise of life seemed to fade into the background. A sudden, sharp cry pierced the air, yanking Mac from his thoughts. He looked up, scanning the area, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw a small figure thrashing in the water. Without thinking, he jumped to his feet and sprinted towards the edge of the river. The boy was flailing, his arms barely breaking the surface as the current pulled him farther from the shore. Mac's heart raced. He knew this river well. It wasn't forgiving to anyone, let alone a child. Without a second thought, he kicked off his worn boots and plunged into the icy water. The cold hit him like a shock, but he powered through, his strokes strong and deliberate. The boy's cries were weaker now, more like gasps, and Mac pushed himself harder, ignoring the biting cold that seeped into his bones. "Hold on, kid, I got you!" Mac shouted, his voice rough but steady as he reached out. His fingers brushed against the boy's shirt, and with a final lunge, he grabbed hold of him, pulling him close. The boy clung to him desperately, his small body trembling in fear and cold. Mac turned and fought against the current, using every ounce of strength to swim back to the shore. The river seemed determined to keep them, pulling at his legs, dragging him down, but he refused to let go. With a grunt, he kicked harder, inch by inch, bringing them closer to safety. Finally, Mac's feet touched the muddy bottom. He staggered forward, dragging the boy with him until they both collapsed on the riverbank, gasping for air. Mac lay there for a moment, chest heaving, his heart pounding against his ribs. The boy was coughing, water spilling from his mouth as he struggled to breathe. "You're okay now," Max said, more to reassure himself than the boy. He pushed himself up on one elbow, looking down at the kid. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. The sound of hurried footsteps approached, and Mac looked up to see a man running toward them. The man's expensive suit was out of place in the muddy park, but he didn't seem to care. His eyes were locked on the boy, panic etched into his features. "Eli!" the man shouted, dropping to his knees beside them. He pulled the boy into his arms, his voice trembling. Thank God, you're okay." Mac watched the reunion in silence, his body still shaking from the cold. He started to push himself up, ready to leave them to their moment, but the man turned to him, eyes wide with gratitude. "You saved my son. I don't even know your name," the man said, his voice thick with emotion. Mac shrugged, trying to brush off the thanks. "Just did what anyone would do," he muttered, glancing away. "No," the man insisted, shaking his head. "Not everyone would have jumped in. You saved his life." Mac finally met the man's gaze, seeing the sincerity there. He nodded slightly, uncomfortable with the praise, but knowing there was no point in arguing. "Mac," he said simply. "Thank you, Mac. I'm Nathan. I owe you everything," Nathan said, his grip tightening on Eli, who was still clinging to his father. Mac nodded again, feeling the chill of the water seeping deeper into his bones. "Just take care of your kid," he said, turning to leave before the man could say more. He needed to get out of these wet clothes, needed to find somewhere to warm up before the cold settled in for good. But as he walked away, he could feel Nathan's eyes on his back, the weight of gratitude following him. Mac didn't need thanks. He didn't need anything, really. But as he glanced back one last time at the boy, now safe in his father's arms, he felt a strange sense of fulfillment, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. Mac's clothes were still damp from the river as he made his way through the park, the chill of the evening air biting at his skin. He shoved his hands deeper into his coat pockets, trying to keep warm. The park was quieter now, the few people around barely noticing him as he walked by. That suited him just fine. He didn't need attention. He just needed to find a place to lay low until he could shake off the cold. He was almost out of the park when he heard footsteps behind him. He sighed, knowing exactly who it would be before he turned around. "Mac, wait!" Nathan called out, hurrying to catch up. He had Eli by the hand, the boy bundled in a blanket now, looking much warmer and safer than he had by the river. Nathan's eyes were intense, filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. Mac stopped, waiting for them to catch up. He didn't have the energy to keep walking anyway. The cold had settled into his bones, making every step feel like a struggle. Nathan slowed as he reached Mac, his breath coming in short bursts. "You didn't give me a chance to thank you properly back there." he said, his voice sincere but tinged with a hint of frustration. You saved my son's life. I can't just let you walk away without doing something in return. Max shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at Eli, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. I didn't do it for thanks or for a reward, Mac replied, his tone gruff. I did it because the kid needed help. That's all. Nathan shook his head, clearly not satisfied with that answer. I understand that, but that doesn't mean I can't show my gratitude. Please let me help you in some way. Anything you need, money, a place to stay, just name it. Mac's jaw tightened. He'd been offered handouts before, and he'd learned the hard way that there was always a price. He didn't want to be beholden to anyone, not even someone who genuinely meant well. I don't need your money, he said firmly. And I don't need your charity. Nathan looked taken aback, but he quickly recovered. It's not charity, Mac. It's just one man helping another. You don't have to do this alone. Mac's eyes flickered with something between anger and exhaustion. He didn't want this man's pity, didn't want to be seen as some charity case just because he happened to be down on his luck. I've been on my own for a long time, Max said quietly, the edge in his voice softening just a bit. I know how to get by. Just take care of your boy, that's enough. Nathan seemed to struggle with this for a moment, as if trying to find the right words to convince Mac. You don't have to be alone, he finally said, his voice gentler now. There's nothing wrong with accepting help when you need it. Mac shook his head, the weariness of the day settling on his shoulders. I've got my pride, he muttered, more to himself than to Nathan. He looked down at Eli again, seeing the boy's eyes still fixed on him, full of something like admiration. It made Mac feel exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years. Nathan sighed, realizing he wasn't going to win this argument. At least take my number, he said, pulling a card from his pocket and holding it out. If you change your mind, or if you need anything at all, just call me. Mac hesitated before finally taking the card, more out of a desire to end the conversation than any intention of actually using it. He looked at it briefly. Nathan's name printed in bold letters, followed by a number, but he didn't say anything as he tucked it into his pocket. Nathan gave him a small, tired smile. Thank you again, Mac. I mean it. Mac just nodded, turning away before the conversation could drag on any longer. Take care of yourself, and take care of the kid, he said over his shoulder as he started walking again. Eli's voice stopped him. Mac? Mac paused, turning slightly to look back at the boy. Thank you, Eli said, his voice small but earnest. Mac managed a faint smile, something softening in his expression. You're welcome, kid, he replied, then turned and walked away, his steps heavy but purposeful. Nathan watched him go, a mixture of gratitude and helplessness in his eyes. He squeezed Eli's hand, drawing the boy closer to him. Come on, Eli, he said softly. Let's go home. As Mac disappeared into the growing shadows of the city, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. He didn't know how or when, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't let Mac slip away so easily next time. Mac walked on, the card burning a hole in his pocket. He'd refused the offer, kept his pride intact, but something in Nathan's words stuck with him. There was a difference between charity and help. He knew that, but old habits were hard to break, and Mac had lived too long on the edge to trust easily. Still, as he found a quiet corner to rest for the night, he couldn't help but think of Eli's voice, soft and sincere. Thank you. It was a long time since anyone had thanked him for anything. And that, more than anything else, made him wonder if maybe, just maybe, accepting help wasn't the same as losing his pride. But for now it was just a thought, one he wasn't ready to face head on. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes as the city hummed around him. The cold was still there, but it didn't bite as hard, and in the pocket of his coat, Nathan's card lay untouched. A reminder that maybe he didn't have to be alone forever. But that was a decision for another day. For now, all Mac wanted was to forget, if only for a little while. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Nathan's upscale apartment, casting a warm glow over the modern furnishings. Eli sat at the breakfast table, absently pushing his cereal around in the bowl. His mind wasn't on breakfast. It was on Mac, the man who had saved his life. Nathan watched his son from across the table, noticing the faraway look in his eyes. It had been a couple of days since the incident at the river, and while Eli seemed fine physically, something was clearly weighing on him. Nathan had expected some after effects, but this quietness was new. You okay, buddy? Nathan asked, setting his coffee mug down and leaning in a little closer. Eli looked up, his small face serious in a way that made him seem older than his years. Dad, we have to help him, he said, his voice soft but determined. Nathan blinked, momentarily confused. Help who? Mac, Eli said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He saved me. We can't just let him go back to that. Nathan sighed, understanding now. He'd been thinking about Mac too, wondering if he should try to reach out again. The man's refusal of help had been firm, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that Mac needed more than he was willing to admit. I tried to help him, Eli, Nathan said gently, but he didn't want it. Some people are just proud. They don't want to accept help, even when they need it. Eli frowned, clearly not satisfied with that explanation. But it's not fair, he insisted. He saved me, Dad. We have to do something. Nathan reached across the table, placing a hand on Eli's. I know you want to help, and that's a good thing, but we can't force him to take something he doesn't want. Eli shook his head, his brow furrowing in determination. Then we have to make him want it. We have to find a way. Nathan smiled slightly at his son's persistence. Eli had always been kind-hearted, always wanting to help others. It was one of the things Nathan loved most about him. It's not that simple, Eli, Nathan said, though he could see that his words weren't making much of a dent. Eli looked up at his father, his eyes bright with an idea. What if we offered him a job? He wouldn't be taking a handout then, right? He'd be working for it. Nathan considered this, surprised by the thoughtfulness behind it. It was a good idea, one that might just work. Maybe, well, he said slowly, but Mac might still say no. Eli's expression was resolute. Then I'll ask him. He won't say no to me. Nathan looked at his son, seeing the determination there. He didn't have the heart to refuse him. And truthfully, he didn't want to. He wanted to help Mac too. And maybe this was the way to do it. Okay, Nathan said finally. We'll try. Later that afternoon, Nathan and Eli drove to the park where they had met Mac. The park was quieter than it had been the day of the rescue, the late summer heat keeping most people indoors. They walked through the park, Nathan scanning the area until he spotted a familiar figure sitting on a bench, staring out at the river. There he is, Nathan said, pointing Mac out to Eli. Eli's eyes lit up, and he quickened his pace, tugging Nathan along with him. As they approached, Mac looked up, his expression guarded but curious. Hey, Mac, Nathan greeted him, trying to keep his tone light. Mac nodded in response, his eyes flicking from Nathan to Eli. What are you two doing here? He asked, though his tone wasn't as harsh as it had been before. Eli stepped forward, his face earnest. We came to see you, he said simply. Mac looked down at the bomb, and something in his expression softened. Why's that? Because we want to help you, Eli said, his voice clear and direct. You saved me, Mac. We can't just leave you out here. You need a place to stay, and my dad can give you a job. You wouldn't have to take any handouts. You'd be working for it. Mac blinked, clearly taken aback by the boy's straightforwardness. He looked up at Nathan, who nodded in agreement. We could use someone like you, Nathan said. I have a few properties that need maintenance work. It's nothing fancy, but it's steady. And there's a small apartment in one of the buildings you could stay in while you work. It's not much, but it's better than being out here. Mac hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly as he considered the offer. And what's the catch? He asked, his voice cautious. No catch, Nathan replied. You'd be earning your keep, just like you said you wanted. It's a fair deal. Eli looked up at Mac, his eyes wide and hopeful. Please, Mac, you don't have to be alone anymore. Mac glanced between the two of them, the weight of the decision clear in his expression. He didn't want to owe anyone anything, but the sincerity in Eli's plea was hard to ignore. And the truth was, he was tired. Tired of the cold, tired of the struggle. Maybe, just maybe, this was something he could accept. Finally, Mac nodded, his decision made. All right, Al, he said gruffly. I'll take the job, but I earn my keep. No handouts, no favors. I work for everything I get. Eli beamed, his smile wide and genuine. Deal, he said, reaching out to shake Mac's hand. Mac looked down at the boy's outstretched hand, and after a moment he took it, his grip firm but gentle. Nathan watched the exchange, feeling a sense of relief and satisfaction. They had reached him. Mac had agreed. Nathan extended his hand as well. Welcome aboard, Mac. Mac shook Nathan's hand, his expression unreadable but resolved. Thanks, he said quietly. Nathan smiled, feeling a sense of hope for the first time in days. Let's get you settled then, he said, leading the way back to the car. As they walked, Eli stayed close to Mac, chattering excitedly about all the things they could do together now that Mac would be around more often. Mac listened, his usual guardedness melting away slightly in the face of the boy's enthusiasm. For the first time in a long while, Mac felt like he wasn't just surviving, he was starting something new. And while it made him nervous, it also felt good. The path ahead wasn't clear, and there were bound to be challenges. But for now, Mac allowed himself to take that first step, letting hope in, just a little bit. Max stood in the middle of the small apartment, his rough hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. The place was simple: bare walls, a bed, a small kitchen area, and a tiny bathroom. There was a window that looked out onto a quiet street, its curtains fluttering slightly in the breeze. It was clean, neat, and most importantly, it was his. But as he looked around, all he could think was how out of place he felt. "This ain't my world, but it's a roof," Mac muttered to himself, his voice low, almost as if he was trying to convince himself. He walked over to the bed, pressing down on the mattress. It was firmer than anything he'd slept on in years, and the feel of it under his hand made him uneasy. The last time he'd had a bed like this, he'd lost it all: his home, his family, everything that had once made him who he was. Now here he was again, in a place that felt alien, surrounded by walls that seemed too close. Mac ran a hand over his face, trying to shake off the memories that threatened to surface. He wasn't the man he used to be. In this life, this wasn't his, but it was what he had now thanks to Nathan and Eli. That thought brought a mix of gratitude and resentment, emotions he wasn't sure how to handle. There was a knock at the door, breaking him out of his thoughts. Mac opened it to find Nathan standing there, holding a small toolkit. "Hey," Nathan said with a friendly smile. "I thought you might need this for the work." Mac nodded, stepping aside to let him in. Nathan walked in, glancing around the apartment as he handed Mac the kit. "I know it's not much, but I hope you'll be comfortable here," Nathan said, a touch of concern in his voice. "It's fine," Mac replied, his tone gruff but not unfriendly. "More than I'm used to, anyway." Nathan smiled slightly, but there was a tension in his expression that Mac didn't miss. Nathan hesitated for a moment, then asked, "How are you settling in?" Mac shrugged, placing the toolkit on the small table by the window. "It's a place to sleep, out of the cold. I'm not complaining." Nathan nodded, but his eyes were searching, as if he was looking for something more in Mac's words. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, just let me know," Nathan said. Mac met his gaze, understanding what he wasn't saying. Nathan was trying to make sure Mac was okay, trying to make this transition easier for him. But Mac wasn't used to people caring. He wasn't sure he liked it. "I'm good," Mac said after a moment. "I'll start on the work tomorrow." "Take your time," Nathan replied. "There's no rush." Mac just nodded, not entirely sure how to respond to the kindness. Nathan gave him a small smile before heading toward the door. "If you need anything, you know where to find me," Nathan said before he left. Once he was alone again, Mac sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the toolkit. The day felt heavy, like the weight of his new circumstances was pressing down on him. But it was a weight he'd chosen to carry, and he knew he had to push through it. The next morning, Mac set out to work. The job was simple: fixing small things around the building, patching up leaks, replacing old fixtures, and making sure everything was in working order. It wasn't hard work, but it was steady, and it kept his mind occupied. As he moved through the building, he noticed the tenants watching him. Some were curious, others wary. He couldn't blame them. A man like him didn't usually end up in places like this, and he wasn't blind to the way people looked at him, like he didn't belong. But Mac ignored it, focusing on the tasks in front of him. A few days passed, and the work became routine. Mac kept to himself, doing his job quietly and efficiently. He didn't see much of Nathan, who was busy with his business, but Eli would occasionally stop by after school, chatting with Mac as he worked. The boy's innocence was refreshing, and though Mac wasn't used to having someone around, he found himself looking forward to those moments. One afternoon, while Mac was fixing a leaky faucet in one of the apartments, he overheard a conversation in the hallway. The voices were low, but the words were clear. "Are you sure this is wise, Nathan? He's not exactly one of us," a man's voice said, dripping with skepticism. Mac froze, recognizing the voice as one of Nathan's business partners. He'd seen the man before, always well-dressed, always polished. The kind of man who'd never given Mac a second glance. Nathan's voice responded, firm but measured. "I know what I'm doing, Peter. Mac's working hard, and he deserves a chance." "I just don't see why you're putting so much faith in him," Peter replied. "What if something goes wrong? He could bring trouble, and that's the last thing we need." "There's more to Mac than you realize," Nathan said, his voice steady. "He saved my son's life. That's all the reason I need to give him a chance." Peter sighed, clearly not convinced. "Just be careful, Nathan. People talk, and not everyone's going to be as understanding as you are." The conversation ended, and Mac heard footsteps retreating down the hall. He clenched his jaw, the old anger bubbling up inside him. He knew he wasn't like them, didn't belong in their world, but hearing it said so plainly still stung. But more than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was causing problems for Nathan, someone who'd only tried to help him. Mac finished the job in silence, the weight of Peter's words hanging over him. As he packed up his tools, his thoughts churned. Maybe Peter was right. Maybe this wasn't the place for him. But then he remembered Eli's plea, the boy's trust in him. He couldn't just walk away, not after everything. When Mac returned to his apartment, he sat by the window, staring out at the street below. The world outside felt distant, like it was part of a life he could no longer touch. But this new life, it was here, whether he felt ready for it or not. He pulled out Nathan's card from his pocket, the edges worn from being handled so many times. Mac knew he had a choice to make. He could stay, keep working, and try to build something from the wreckage of his old life. Or he could leave, go back to the streets, where things were simpler, where no one expected anything from him. But as he sat there, Mac knew he couldn't go back. He'd made a promise to Eli and to himself. He would see this through, no matter how out of place he felt. With a deep breath, Mac put the card back in his pocket and stood up. He had work to do, and that was something he could focus on, something that made sense. The rest, he'd figure out as he went. The days were growing shorter, with the sun setting earlier each evening, casting long shadows across the small courtyard of the apartment building. Mac was crouched by an old bike that Eli had brought down from his father's storage, its chain rusted and tires flat. The boy stood nearby, watching intently as Mac examined the bike, his small face a mix of curiosity and concern. "This thing's seen better days," Mac said, wiping his hands on a rag before turning the bike over to get a better look at the underside. "But it's not beyond fixing." Eli's eyes lit up with hope. "You think we can fix it?" he asked eagerly. Mac gave a small nod, reaching for a wrench. "We can," he said, his voice steady, "but it's going to take some work. You up for it?" Eli nodded enthusiastically, eager to help. He'd been spending more and more time with Mac lately, and though Mac wasn't one for talking much, Eli felt comfortable around him. There was something calming about the way Mac moved, deliberate and careful, like he knew exactly what needed to be done and wasn't in any rush to get there. Mac started by showing Eli how to remove the rusted chain. He handed Eli a smaller wrench, guiding his hands as they worked together. "It's about patience, kid," Mac said as they tightened a stubborn bolt. "You rush, you break it. Take your time, do it right." Eli nodded, absorbing the lesson. He could feel the tension in the bolt, how it gradually loosened under their combined effort. There was a rhythm to the work, a quiet focus that made him forget about everything else. Nathan watched them from a distance, leaning against the doorway to the courtyard. He'd come down to check on Eli, but when he saw how absorbed the boy was in what they were doing, he decided to hang back and observe instead. He couldn't help but notice the way Mac interacted with Eli. Patient, steady, and without a hint of the hardness Nathan had expected. Mac was teaching Eli more than just how to fix a bike. He was showing him the value of persistence, the importance of doing things the right way, even if it took longer. It was a side of Mac that Nathan hadn't seen before, and it gave him pause. Mac and Eli worked in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds being the creak of the bike and the occasional soft instructions from Mac. After a time, they had the bike back in decent shape. The chain was clean and oiled, the tires inflated, and the rusty patches scrubbed away as much as possible. Mac stood back, wiping his hands again as Eli climbed onto the bike to test it out. The boy wobbled slightly as he pushed off, but Mac was there, steadying him with a firm hand on the seat. "Easy now," Mac said. "You've got it. Just keep your balance." Eli grinned as he found his balance, pedaling around the courtyard. His laughter echoed in the small space, and Mac couldn't help but smile a little himself, though he quickly wiped the expression from his face when he caught Nathan's eye. Nathan walked over, his steps slow and deliberate. "That was impressive," he said, nodding toward the bike. "Didn't think that old thing could be fixed." Mac shrugged, his eyes on Eli, as the boy rode around in circles. "Just needed some attention," he replied. "Not everything's ready for the scrap heap." Nathan heard the deeper meaning in Mac's words, but he didn't comment on it. Instead, he watched his son for a moment longer, appreciating the joy on Eli's face. "He needs someone like you around," Nathan said softly. "Someone who cares enough to teach him these things." Mac looked at Nathan, searching his face for any sign of pity or judgment, but there was none. Just a quiet sincerity that made Mac uncomfortable, though he couldn't say why. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Mac replied, his voice gruff. Nathan nodded, understanding that Mac wasn't one to accept praise easily. "Still," he said, "it means a lot to him. And to me." Mac didn't respond, but Nathan could see the acknowledgement in the way Mac's shoulders relaxed just a bit. They stood there for a moment, watching Eli as he continued to ride, the clatter of the bike's wheels filling the silence between them. After a while, Eli rode back over to them, his face flushed with excitement. "Mac, did you see? It's working great." Mac nodded, reaching out to adjust the handlebars slightly. "You did good, kid. Just remember what I said. Take your time, and don't rush it." Eli beamed, clearly proud of the work they had done together. "Can we fix more stuff tomorrow?" Mac hesitated, not used to this kind of enthusiasm directed at him. But he could see that Eli wasn't just asking for more help with the bike. He was asking for more time, more of this bond that had started to form between them. "Sure," Mac said finally. "We'll see what else we can find to fix." Eli grinned, satisfied with the answer, before riding off again. Nathan watched his son go, then turned back to Mac. "I'm glad you're here, Mac," Nathan said, his voice low but sincere, "for both of us." Mac didn't reply, just gave a small nod. But as Nathan walked away, Mac couldn't help but feel a strange warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the feeling of being needed, of making a difference, even if it was just in small ways. As he watched Eli ride, Mac realized that maybe, just maybe, this new start wasn't just for Eli or Nathan. Maybe it was for him too, even if he didn't quite know how to handle it yet. The morning air was crisp as Mac walked through the courtyard, the sun just beginning to rise over the rooftops. He had gotten into the habit of waking up early, enjoying the quiet before the day's work began. The routine was grounding, something he could rely on when everything else seemed uncertain. As he made his way to the small shed where he kept his tools, Mac noticed that the door to Nathan's office was slightly ajar. He paused, hearing voices inside. It wasn't unusual for Nathan to have early meetings, but there was something about the tone of the conversation that made Mac stop and listen. "I'm telling you, Nathan, this isn't a good idea." The voice was sharp, impatient. It was Peter, one of Nathan's business partners, the same man Mac had overheard before. Nathan's reply was quieter but firm. "I've heard your concerns, Peter, but I'm not going to just abandon Mac. He's been nothing but hardworking and reliable." Peter's response was quick, almost cutting. "Hardworking or not, he's a risk. You've worked too hard to risk it all on some charity case. He's bad for business, Nathan." People are starting to talk. Mac felt a knot tighten in his chest at Peter's words. He'd known from the start that he didn't fit in here, but hearing it put so bluntly was like a punch to the gut. He took a step back, wanting to leave, but something held him in place, forcing him to hear the rest. Nathan sighed, a sound full of frustration. "Mac saved my son's life. I owe him more than just tossing him back onto the streets." "And that's admirable," Peter conceded, his tone softening slightly. "But there are other ways to help him that don't involve risking your reputation. This isn't just about you, Nathan. You have responsibilities to your business, your family, and to everyone who depends on you. You can't let one man jeopardize all of that." There was a long pause, and Mac could almost picture the conflict on Nathan's face. He'd seen it before, the way Nathan would hesitate when someone questioned his decisions about Mac. It wasn't doubt in Mac's abilities, but something deeper. Something tied to the pressure from people like Peter. Finally, Nathan spoke, his voice weary. "I'll think about what you've said, Peter, but I won't make any decisions without careful consideration." "Just don't wait too long," Peter warned. "These things have a way of spiraling out of control. I'd hate to see all your hard work come undone because of one bad choice." Mac couldn't listen anymore. He turned and walked away, his steps heavy. He didn't want to hear Nathan's response, didn't want to know what more might be said. The words he'd already heard were enough to plant a seed of doubt in his mind, one that took root and began to grow as he made his way back to his apartment. Once inside, Mac paced the small room, the conversation playing over and over in his head. He knew he was different. He'd always known that, but hearing Peter's words, knowing that people were talking, that they saw him as a threat to Nathan's success, it all made him question everything. "Maybe they're right," Mac muttered to himself, his voice low. "Maybe I don't belong here." He stopped in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection. The man looking back at him was someone he barely recognized anymore. Clean-shaven, wearing decent clothes, living in an apartment instead of on the streets. He looked like someone who might belong in Nathan's world. But appearances were just that, appearances. Deep down, he was still the same man who had lived rough, who had survived by keeping his head down and not getting involved. And yet, here he was, involved in something bigger than he'd ever intended. He'd been fine with that when it was just about helping out, doing the work Nathan gave him, and trying to make a new start. But now it was different. Now he was a problem, a liability. The thought gnawed at him, making it hard to breathe. He'd never wanted to be a burden to anyone, and the idea that he might be the one to bring Nathan down made him sick to his stomach. As the day went on, Mac threw himself into his work, hoping the physical labor would clear his mind. But no matter how hard he worked, the doubt lingered, whispering in the back of his mind, making him second-guess every decision, every interaction. When Eli came by that afternoon, Mac found it hard to meet the boy's eyes. Eli chattered on about school, his friends, and the plans he had for the weekend, completely unaware of the turmoil brewing inside Mac. "Hey, Mac," Eli said suddenly, pulling Mac out of his thoughts. "Are we still going to fix the other bike tomorrow?" Mac hesitated, the question hitting him harder than it should have. He forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, kid, we'll get to it." Eli beamed, completely oblivious to the tension in Mac's voice. He started to talk about something else, but Mac barely heard him. All he could think about was the conversation he'd overheard and the nagging feeling that maybe it was time for him to leave before things got worse. As evening fell, Mac found himself back in his apartment, staring at the door. The temptation to pack up and go was strong, almost overwhelming. He'd done it before. Just picked up and left when things got too complicated. It was easier that way, safer. But this time was different. There was Eli to think about, and Nathan, who had given him a chance when no one else would, and that made it harder. Made him question whether leaving was really the right thing to do. Max sat down on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He was caught between two worlds, neither of which felt like they truly belonged to him. The streets were behind him, but this new life, with its expectations and pressures, was something he wasn't sure he could handle. But as much as he wanted to run, something kept him rooted in place. A sense of responsibility, maybe. Or maybe it was something more. Something he wasn't ready to admit to himself yet. For now, all he could do was wait and see what tomorrow would bring, and hope that somehow he'd find a way to make peace with the doubts that had been planted in his mind. The day had been unusually quiet, a calm before the storm. Mac had gone through his usual routine, but the unease from the conversation he'd overheard gnawed at him all day. By the time evening rolled around, the weight of his doubts had become unbearable. He decided to confront Nathan. There was no point in dragging it out, letting the tension build until it exploded on its own. Better to face it head on, to get everything out in the open, even if it meant risking everything. Nathan was in his office going over some paperwork when Mac found him. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the desk lamp that cast long shadows across the walls. Nathan looked up when Mac entered, sensing something was off from the way Mac stood in the doorway, his posture stiff, his face tight with barely suppressed anger. "Mac?" Nathan asked, his voice cautious. "What's going on?" Mac didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I heard you this morning," he said, his voice low and tense. "Heard what your partner said about me." Nathan's eyes widened in surprise, and then in realization. "Mac, you think I don't know how you see me?" Mac cut him off, his anger spilling over. "Just some charity case you can feel good about? Something to make you sleep better at night?" Nathan stood up, his hands outstretched in a placating gesture. "Mac, it's not like that. I'm trying to help." "Help?" Mac's voice rose, thick with bitterness. "Is that what you call this? I'm just another project for you, aren't I? Something to fix so you can feel better about yourself." Nathan's frustration grew, his tone shifting from calm to defensive. "That's not fair, Mac. I've done everything I can to give you a chance, to help you get back on your feet. Because you feel guilty," Mac shot back, his words sharp. "You think I don't see that? You're trying to make up for something, to prove you're not like the rest of them." Nathan's patience snapped. "This isn't about guilt, Mac. This is about doing what's right, about giving someone a chance when no one else would." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" Mac challenged, stepping closer, his voice hard. "It's about making sure you're the good guy, the one who did the right thing. You don't care about me. You care about what it says about you." Nathan's eyes flashed with anger, but there was something else there too, something more vulnerable, more hurt. "Is that what you really think?" he asked, his voice quiet but intense. "That I don't care, that this is all just some game to me?" Mac faltered for a moment, seeing the pain in Nathan's eyes, but his own doubts and anger wouldn't let him back down. "I don't know what to think anymore," he said, his voice rough. "All I know is that I don't belong here. Not with you, not in this world." Nathan's frustration boiled over. "Damn it, Mac, why can't you just accept that someone wants to help you? Why does it have to be about guilt or pity? Why can't it just be about doing the right thing because it's the right thing?" "Because that's not how the world works," Mac snapped. "Not for people like me." The argument was loud enough that neither of them noticed a small figure standing just outside the door, listening. Eli had been coming to find his father, hoping to spend some time with him before bed, but the raised voices had stopped him in his tracks. He stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest as he listened to the angry words being exchanged. Inside the office, the tension was at its peak. Mac and Nathan stood facing each other, both breathing heavily, the air thick with unresolved emotions. "I'm done with this," Mac said finally, his voice raw. "I'm not going to be your charity case anymore. I'll pack my things and be gone by morning." Nathan's anger was quickly replaced by a look of shock and desperation. "Mac, no. Wait, let's talk about this. You don't have to leave." But Mac was already turning away, his mind made up. He couldn't stay, not after everything that had been said. Not when the doubts in his mind had grown too loud to ignore. Just as Mac was about to leave the room, a small voice interrupted the silence, trembling with fear and confusion. "Are you leaving because of me?" Both men turned to see Eli standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and filled with tears. The sight of him stopped Mac in his tracks, his anger suddenly evaporating in the face of the boy's distress. Nathan moved quickly, kneeling down to Eli's level. "No, Eli, it's not your fault. This is between Mac and me. You didn't do anything wrong." But Eli shook his head, tears spilling over onto his cheeks. "It is my fault. I'm the one who wanted you to help Mac. If I hadn't said anything, maybe you wouldn't be fighting." Mac's heart clenched painfully at the sight of Eli's tears. The boy's words cut deeper than anything Nathan had said, filling Mac with a wave of guilt and regret. "Eli, listen to me," Mac said, his voice softening as he knelt down beside Nathan. "This isn't your fault, okay? You didn't do anything wrong. I'm just not good at this, that's all." "But you can't leave," Eli pleaded, his small hands gripping Mac's shirt. "You're my friend, Mac. Please don't go." Mac looked into Eli's eyes, seeing the pain and fear there. It was too much to bear, too much to walk away from. But he didn't know what else to do. The doubts in his mind were too strong, the fear of not belonging too overwhelming. Nathan watched the exchange, his own heart breaking at the sight of his son's distress. He reached out, placing a hand on Mac's shoulder. "Mac, please, don't do this. We can work this out, together. Don't let this be the end." But Mac couldn't find the words to respond. All he could do was look at Eli, his heart torn between the urge to stay and the fear of making things worse. Before anyone could say anything more, Eli suddenly pulled away, his face contorted with pain. "I'm sorry," he cried before turning and running out of the room. "Eli, wait," Nathan called after him. But the boy was already gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Max stood up, his face pale. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "I know," Nathan replied, his voice strained. "But we have to find him before something else does." Without another word, both men rushed out of the room, their earlier argument forgotten in the face of their shared fear for Eli. The rift between them was still there, but in that moment, it was overshadowed by a more urgent concern, the safety of the boy they both cared for. The cold night air hit them as Mac and Nathan rushed out of the house, their minds racing with fear and guilt. Eli was out there, alone, and the darkness seemed to swallow every sound except for the pounding of their footsteps on the pavement. Nathan's voice was tight with panic. Where would he go? He's never run off like this before. Mac's eyes scanned the shadows, his heart beating fast. Think, Nathan. Where does he feel safe? Where would he go if he was scared? Nathan's mind raced. Eli was only 7. He didn't know the city like they did. He loves the park down the street. Sometimes we go there when he's upset. But it's late, Mac. What if he's... Mac cut him off, his voice firm. Don't think like that. We'll find him. But we need to split up. You check the park. I'll head toward the river. Nathan hesitated. The river? Why there? Because it's where I found him the first time, Mac replied, his voice heavy with the memory. Maybe he'll go back there. Nathan's throat tightened, guilt washing over him. This is my fault. I should have been paying more attention. I pushed him away, Mac. I pushed you away. Mac stopped, turning to face Nathan. No, Nathan. This isn't about blame. Eli needs us now, both of us. We can figure out the rest later, but right now, we have to find him. Nathan nodded, though his eyes were filled with self-reproach. You're right. Let's go. They parted ways, each heading toward their designated search area, the urgency of their mission pushing aside their earlier conflict. As Mac walked quickly toward the river, his thoughts were a jumble of fear and regret. He couldn't shake the image of Eli's tear-streaked face, the boy's small hands clutching his shirt, begging him not to leave. Mac's pace quickened. He didn't care about what had happened between him and Nathan anymore. The only thing that mattered was finding Eli, making sure the boy was safe. As he neared the riverbank, the familiar sound of rushing water filled his ears. The river was darker at night, the water reflecting the dim light from the street lamps above. Max strained his eyes, searching for any sign of the boy. "Eli!" Max's voice echoed in the night, but there was no response, only the steady rush of the water. He cursed under his breath, his chest tightening with worry. Where could Eli be? He walked along the riverbank, calling out Eli's name, but the darkness and the sound of the water drowned out his voice. The farther he went, the more desperate he became. "Come on, kid," he muttered to himself. "Where are you?" Meanwhile, Nathan was running toward the park, his mind filled with memories of happier times. He remembered pushing Eli on the swings, the boy's laughter filling the air. Now the park seemed empty and eerie, the playground equipment casting long, ghostly shadows in the moonlight. Nathan's breath came in short gasps as he called out for his son. "Eli! Eli, where are you?" But the park was silent, except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Nathan's heart sank. He could feel the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. How had things gone so wrong? How had he let his son and Mac slip through his fingers? As Nathan searched the park, a sudden thought struck him. The treehouse. Eli loved the old treehouse at the edge of the park. They hadn't been there in months, but it had always been Eli's favorite spot. Nathan ran to the edge of the park where the large oak tree stood. The treehouse was barely visible in the darkness, but he could make out its shape, a small wooden structure nestled in the branches. "Eli?" Nathan's voice was softer now, more tentative. He climbed up the ladder, his heart pounding with hope and fear. When he reached the top, he saw a small figure huddled in the corner, his face buried in his knees. "Eli!" Nathan's voice broke with relief as he rushed over to his son, wrapping him in a tight embrace. "Thank God, you're okay." Eli didn't respond at first, his body trembling as he clung to his father. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice muffled against Nathan's chest. "I didn't mean to make you fight." Nathan's heart ached as he held his son. "It's okay, Eli. None of this is your fault. I'm the one who should be sorry." Eli looked up, his eyes red from crying. "But Mac, he's leaving because of me." Nathan shook his head, his own eyes filled with tears. "No, Eli. He's not leaving because of you. He cares about you so much. We both do. And we're going to fix this. I promise." Eli sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Can we go find him? I don't want him to leave." Nathan nodded, pulling Eli close. "Yes, we'll find him. We'll make this right." They climbed down from the tree house, and Nathan pulled out his phone, dialing Mac's number. His hands shook as he held the phone to his ear, praying that Mac would answer. After a few rings, Mac's voice came through, breathless and strained. "Mac, it's Nathan. I found him. He's safe." Mac let out a sigh of relief, leaning against a nearby tree. "Thank God. Where are you?" "We're at the park by the tree house," Nathan replied. "Come back, Mac. He needs you. We both do." Mac closed his eyes, the tension slowly leaving his body. "I'm on my way." When Mac arrived at the park, he saw Nathan and Eli standing by the swings, waiting for him. The moment Eli saw Mac, he broke free from his father's grasp and ran toward him, throwing his arms around Mac's waist. Mac knelt down, hugging the boy tightly. "You scared me, kid," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Don't ever do that again." Eli nodded, burying his face in Mac's shoulder. "I won't, I promise." Nathan approached them, his expression a mix of guilt and gratitude. But Mac shook his head, cutting him off. "We can talk later. Right now, let's just get him home." Nathan nodded, placing a hand on Mac's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Mac didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. The three of them walked back to the house in silence, the weight of the night's events hanging over them. But something had shifted between them, a new understanding forged in the darkness. As they reached the house, Nathan glanced at Mac, his expression serious. "We'll figure this out," he said softly. "Together." Mac looked back at him, his eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Together." And as they stepped inside, closing the door behind them, the tension that had once threatened to tear them apart began to fade, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of trust. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the modest living room. The air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet hum of life returning to normalcy after the chaotic night before. Max stood by the window, gazing out at the world beyond. The river that once symbolized the divide between his past and the present now seemed like a distant memory. The apartment, small but comfortable, had started to feel less like a temporary shelter and more like a home. Footsteps behind him pulled Mac from his thoughts. He turned to see Nathan entering the room, two steaming mugs in hand. Nathan offered one to Mac with a smile, and Mac accepted it, the warmth of the cup seeping into his fingers. "Morning, Nathan said, settling into the chair across from him. His eyes held a quiet determination, as if he'd come to some resolution overnight. "Morning," Mac replied, taking a sip of the coffee. It was stronger than he liked, but he appreciated the gesture. He'd been doing a lot of that lately, accepting the gestures, the offers of help. It was still a strange feeling, letting someone else in, letting himself be cared for. But it wasn't as uncomfortable as it used to be. Nathan leaned back in his chair, studying Mac for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," he began, his tone serious but not heavy. "About what it all means, where we go from here." Mac met his gaze, nodding slightly. He'd been thinking too, wondering what the next step would be, if there was a next step at all. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." Nathan set his mug down on the table, leaning forward slightly. "I know this isn't what you signed up for. Hell, I didn't know what I was signing up for either. But I do know one thing, I don't want this to end here." Mac raised an eyebrow, unsure of where Nathan was going with this. "What do you mean?" Nathan's expression softened. "I mean, you've become more than just a helping hand around here, Mac. You've become important to Eli, and to me. We've been through a lot together, and I think it's time we acknowledge that." Mac looked down at his coffee, the steam curling up in thin tendrils. He wasn't used to this kind of talk, this kind of openness. But there was something in Nathan's voice that made him listen, made him want to listen. Nathan continued, his voice steady. "You saved my son's life, Mac. And in doing that, you changed ours. You've given me a chance to be a better father, and you've shown Eli what it means to care about someone. I don't want to lose that." Mac shifted in his seat, his mind wrestling with the idea. He'd always been on his own, moving from place to place, never settling down. The thought of being a part of something, of a family, was both terrifying and tempting. He cleared his throat, unsure of what to say. Nathan must have sensed his hesitation, because he leaned forward, his tone gentler now. "You're part of this family now, Mac. If you'll have us." Mac looked up, meeting Nathan's gaze. The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. This wasn't about pity or obligation. It was about something real, something that had grown between them over time. He thought about Eli, about the boy's trust and innocence, about the way he looked up to Mac with a kind of quiet admiration. And he thought about Nathan, the man who had taken a chance on him, despite everything. A smile slowly crept onto Mac's face, small but genuine. "I'd like that," he said, his voice steady. Nathan's expression broke into a relieved smile, and he reached across the table, placing a hand on Mac's shoulder. "Then it's settled. We'll figure this out. Together." Just then the sound of small footsteps came from the hallway, and a moment later Eli appeared. His hair tousled from sleep. He rubbed his eyes and looked between Mac and his father, sensing the warmth in the room. "Morning," Eli mumbled, still half asleep. "Morning, buddy," Nathan replied, his voice lighter now. "Come here." Eli shuffled over, and Nathan pulled him onto his lap, holding him close. Eli's gaze drifted to Mac, and a smile spread across his face. "You're staying, right?" he asked, his voice hopeful. Mac chuckled, setting his coffee down. "Yeah, kid, I'm staying." Eli's smile grew wider, and he reached out to grab Mac's hand, his small fingers wrapping around Mac's rough ones. "Good," Eli said simply, as if that was all that needed to be said. Nathan looked at Mac over Eli's head, and they shared a moment of understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. This was their new beginning, a chance to build something better, something stronger. As they sat there, the morning sun growing brighter, Mac felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling he hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, and moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was where he was meant to be. And as the day began, the three of them sitting together, the future didn't seem so daunting. It felt like a promise, one that they would face together, one step at a time.